Hello, I'm Renee, and this is the first episode of my unnamed knitting podcast. I'll have a name by the time I post this. Don't have one now. Wasn't feeling the energy. I've got a short list. I have watched these for so long that it's given me an uncontrollable urge to want to talk to my iPhone for an hour about knitting and to get feedback on it. I'm not sure why. So I hope you enjoy this. And if not, I hopefully do. Yeah. So a little about me is that I've been knitting since 2021, and I crocheted a lot before that, and I sewed a lot before that as well. Someday I'll sew again. So I've been making stuff for a long time. I really enjoy it. But I think knitting's the first thing I've gotten into with such like studious passion. So hopefully that'll be something I can share. Yeah. I don't know how these begin, honestly. I think I just blank out when it happens. So let's get started. So since this is my first knitting podcast, I thought I'd start with my recently completed projects, since you've never seen me before. The definition of recent is a little, well, I didn't actually pick out something that I made too long ago, just one thing, which I guess I'll start with. But I'm going through this process where last year was like my first year of buying a lot of yarn for the first time, like in bulk, and I made so many poor choices. I think I just realized, like, I was used to being like a very like Michaels shopper who like always buys acrylic and like always buys like the cheapest thing in bulk, and like as long as it's sort of soft, and that's fine, which is a completely fine thing to do. I think especially when you crochet and you use so much yarn, that makes a ton of sense. But like for me, where I think in a lot of other aspects of my life, I'm like trying to be like a conscious consumer. I'm trying not to like buy clothes I don't need. I'm trying not to do all this stuff. Like that felt very silly to me. So I think I'm trying to be a lot more mindful this year. I'm trying not to buy yarn this year because I purchased so much yarn that I don't really end up even liking last year. So now I'm trying to sort of find ways to use it up, and find things to use it in that I'm excited about, and not just buying it so that I have this like future idea of projects that I can do, and sort of use this process to find what I like and to buy what I enjoy. I think, yeah, like a lot of this yarn that I bought, like I bought online, and I just like didn't realize like how scratchy it would be, and how much I wouldn't like it. And I think that is still, I think, going to be a difficulty for me, because like if you go to a craft store like Michael's, most of what you're gonna find is going to be like acrylic, or some sort of like wool blend, but you can see it and you can look at it and it's pretty affordable. Or you can go to a yarn store where it's very expensive, and if you're new to knitting or to fiber arts in general, like maybe you don't really know why it's that expensive, you can't really judge. So I think I've made bad purchases in both ways last year, and I think because I was knitting so many socks last year, and I was getting really into like what fibers are for and what they're supposed to do, and also like watching other knitting podcasts and seeing what they were buying, I think I've sort of figured out what things I want to buy in the future, but you know, we'll see. I'm not going to buy anything this year, ideally, anymore. So it'll be a little long before I get to put this plan into practice, but I think these lessons will sort of get to serve me. So that brings me into my first project, which I made with hobby sock yarn. It's the rainbow 4-ply, I think. Anyway, I really like these. I realized that I don't really like this yarn for socks, which I've realized like a lot of sock yarn out there seems to me does not really seem to be made with sock making in mind. I feel like I like look on the Ravelry of a lot of sock yarns that I purchased and I'm like, oh, so you fully made like a shawl with this. And that seems like a better application than what I did with this, which was to make socks. So this uses hobby sock yarn and they are gloves. I was very afraid of making gloves and I thought it would be really difficult. It was actually super easy. So I knit socks for a lot of last year and really loved making socks 2 at a time and really loved like the process of working with like the very tiny needles. And these were sort of almost exactly like that, except for they only use like 50 grams of yarn and they're much more visible to other people. And the fun thing was that like I got to fit them kind of exactly to what my hands, like to the length of my hands, because I could just try them on, which I think is a big win from like store-bought gloves. And they're also very pretty. They have this lace pattern on the front. I've been so undisciplined about telling you any details about this, but this is the Falling Leaves pattern, which is available for free. It is a very beautiful pattern. I found out about these from Retro Claude, who's also on YouTube. She made these as one of her stash busting projects, which I really loved and like fell in love with. But yeah, I made a couple alterations to the pattern where I think I sized down to like a size 0 needle so that they would fit a lot tighter basically, and because my yarn I think is a lot thinner than the yarn that they intend. I think that was most of it. I think to adjust for that, I think I made the hand a little bit longer than they instruct you to do, but it's like I think a one size glove pattern, which makes sense, it's available for free. But the rest of it was very easy to figure out, and I did like 2 at a time all the way up to the hand and when I cast off. So it made it very easy to sort of make adjustments on the go, since I could just make them on the same row at the same time, knitting 2 at a time. And then I didn't realize this, but basically the way that you knit gloves is you like knit them all the way up to here. You start increasing for the thumb here, and then you cast off for the thumb around here. You keep going on up for the rest of the hand, and then you split the rest of the hand into the different fingers, and then you knit those as like these tiny little tubes. So it's actually so much simpler than I thought it was going to be. I guess I don't know how I thought I was going to make gloves. Like now that I'm explaining it, that seems very straightforward. But that's how you do it. It was not hard. It was very fun. One other aspect of this, which I thought was funny and which all my friends thought was the craziest thing they'd ever seen, I think, was that I don't own DPNs. I've always knit like magic loop 2 at a time whenever I'm knitting something on small needles, because I'm usually knitting socks and now gloves. So I didn't have DPNs and I was already working on size 0s. So I was looking at my size 0s and I was like, these are toothpick size. And so that's what I did. I nabbed 3 toothpicks from my local Chinese restaurant the last time that I went there. I took a little 00, I think, knit grit sandpaper to them, used them as DPNs, worked great. Honestly, it was probably better than using regular DPNs because they would be like very long, and this is about this wide. Yeah, it was a little pointy, I'll admit that, but you know, it worked out. And I would probably do it again because I'm crazy. I don't know if that is a great thing to recommend to other people, but that's certainly what I did. And I loved it. I do think these took me a while to knit just because like I kind of gave up on making the fingers, but like it was kind of fun to be like, I have 45 minutes to knit, I'm gonna knit one finger and then I'm done. So that was very enjoyable. I think this is my oldest recently completed project. All the other ones I did do recently. So my next recently completed projects were, I would say, sort of part of a series called my double knitting era, which I hope will continue as well. But I've been experimenting with different ways of doing colorwork. I did a stranded colorwork hat last year for a friend of mine, and I wanted to try out double knitting. I actually tried doing double knitting for this first project and hated it. I really hated the edges. I was just really bad at doing them. And it came out really loose, and I was having so much of a struggle doing it. And the thing that really appealed to me about double knitting is that you sort of like knit the front side and the back side at the same time. Like that seemed very cool to me. I was like, could you knit socks that way? Which we'll see if I get that crazy. But I will say the double knitting that I did, you certainly could not do it, because the edges would just like, I was bad at like sort of layering the yarns on top of each other so that the edges would be enclosed and wouldn't just like be separate sides of the front and back. And they were also really loose for some reason, which I think was just my technique. I don't think everyone's experiencing that. So I planned to use it on this first project, which is a headband for my mom. But I ended up not doing it. I ended up doing a different colorwork technique, intarsia, to knit this instead, where it's a 2-color headband. It should be reversible. This outside is leftover sock yarn I had. I believe it's knitted Wit Sock, and the colorway is Old Lines. When I bought it, they said that the colors are based on the tattoo designs of this female tattoo artist, which is very cool. But I've made like 2 pairs of socks from this. I still have more because I think it's 120 grams instead of 110, or 120 grams instead of 100 per hank, which is pretty good. I really enjoyed working with this. It's like a very bouncy sock yarn, so great sock yarn, honestly. But yeah, I made these socks. I don't know if I'm gonna keep that in. I don't know if that even showed up on the camera, but I didn't have enough left over after making 2 pairs of socks out of the sock yarn to make a full headband in this color. But my mom looked at me making the socks and said, "That's pretty. I would like a headband like that." And I was like, okay. I wasn't gonna do any gift knitting this year, but I did. And I have made this. I didn't make it in time for Christmas, but she will probably get it for Mother's Day, and I'll just hold on to it until then. But I knit this intarsia. There is the sock yarn on the front, and then there's this sort of softer mercerized cotton on the back. I was a little worried that the sock yarn would be a little scratchy for her. Sometimes she is sensitive to wool, as am I, as I'll probably discuss later. So I thought it'd be good. She asked for a red headband anyway, so I figured I'm sort of fulfilling the brief there. Yeah, this worked out kind of perfectly after I figured it out. But I knit it flat with intarsia, and I sort of did these increases so that it would end up as a headband, and then I sewed it all up when I was finished, and then sewed the 2 ends together. I did sort of a good job stitching it together, but we won't talk about that. But yeah, this is my first double knitting attempt, I would say, even though I didn't end up double knitting it. And then my next 2 projects were also gift knits, but they are a little sweeter than that because I'm doing a like knit crochet exchange with 2 of my friends from high school. Recently, we've all sort of gotten into knitting and crochet again. So we're all making cowls for each other. We're each making 2, and then we'll each receive 2. So I've actually already gotten mine from my friend, and it's very nice, but in the past 3 weeks, I've been like, I gotta catch up. So I made these next 2, which were also sort of double knitting, but this first one is an extremely bulky wake version of the Hypatia pattern by Carissa Browning, I believe. But it's a very interesting double knitting technique. It was very beginner friendly to me, someone who had this double knitting experience and found it very aggravating to do. So if you look at it, parts of it are marled with the two yarns held together, and then occasionally they're split off for these little planets, and you double knit these planets. So it was very fun. It was very fun to follow the chart. I think I was a little worried about how this would look in a sort of bulky weight yarn. I think I used like size 10 needles for this. But I think it turned out okay. This is also like a smaller cowl than I think you're supposed to end up with, but I think that's just saying that the pattern is flexible. But yeah, as you may be able to tell, I used a lot of sort of leftover yarns for this project. One of them was, I think this is discontinued, but it's like a Karen yarn, Karen X Pantone collaboration yarn that I had left over, and the other is Drops Air, a yarn that knitting people may frequently buy. But yeah, I really ended up liking the planets. I realized that double knitting was actually not so scary, and I think the color combination really came through on this. I liked that it's kind of easy to weave in ends with double knitting, because you can just like disappear them into the middle of the knitting. And yeah, and it's reversible. I think it's got this like nice sort of like cotton candy look because the Drops Air is so fluffy. But yeah, I really hope that my friend likes it. So that's my first double knitting project. And then my second is this cowl, where I think I got a little too cocky. So you may not even be able to tell that this is double knit, except for that you can see the knitting on both sides. But I made both these projects from sort of leftover yarns that I'm trying to use up. And so I was like, well, I have this sort of like shiny, also I think it's a Karen yarn, that is this like beige, and then I have this sort of more matte, I don't even know where it's from, it's like a mystery yarn that I have that feels sort of like papery to the touch, I don't know. And so I was like, well, I could do this like fun low contrast double knitting pattern where they're all checkerboards with these two sort of different finish yarns, even though they're very similar colors. And then I had to knit this entire thing like in very good light because I really couldn't tell these yarns apart when I was knitting them. But I still, even while I was doing that, I was like, yeah, but like when I'm done, you'll really be able to tell, which I think you can sometimes. Like I showed this to my friend who also knits to display just how violently I had made a mistake. And I was like, yeah, you know, like the checkerboard pattern, it isn't very distinct. And she was holding it and she was like, what? Checkerboard pattern. But if you look very closely, you can tell, maybe on this camera, maybe not, that there's a very indistinct checkerboard pattern. I still really like this. I do kind of like that you can't really tell. I thought it would be slightly more distinct so that you could tell how hard I had worked on it. But I am really happy with this project. I do think it turned out pretty well, and I liked that I just sort of like had an idea and executed on it in like 2 weeks or something like that. And yeah, and also, I don't think I explicitly said this, but if you do double knitting in the round, you never have to do the edges. This was my whole problem, and I simply resolved it. So I think I'm going to double knit a lot of things in the round going forward. I'm already thinking about doing like a double knit hat pattern and trying to make that. So we'll see where that takes me. I'm sort of like, oh, the world is actually open to me. I could do anything double knitting as long as I don't have to do any edges. Yeah, so that's all my completed projects, I think. So now we'll move on to the works in progress. Yeah, I don't think I explicitly said this, but my goal for this year is not to buy any yarn. You're gonna find out that I have. And to not, to sort of work from stash and sort of use up this yarn that I have, either stuff that I don't really like or stuff that I bought last year that is sort of more friendly to me, and sort of execute on these projects. Yeah, I'm mostly doing this because it really stresses me out to have this huge yarn stash where I don't have distinct projects for that, because I just really see myself having that and then still choosing to buy more yarn. So I don't have a huge yarn stash or anything like that. I think it all fits in one huge wool warehouse organza bag. But I still want to just sort of shrink it down, only really have the yarn for the next few projects, and maybe have some leftovers, because I do like working with leftovers, and sort of focus on that. And then next year I'll be so wise when I make my next yarn purchases, and I'll be so good at making sweaters, and everything will be better, I think, which I don't foresee having any problems at all. Yeah, so what do I want to talk about first? I guess first I'll talk about this project, which did force me to break my yarn man, even though it is specifically engineered to use up this yarn that I don't really like. But it is this project which will never end. It is based on a photo I saw of a Vogue knitting project, which was like this lace, like short sleeve button down camp shirt, that I did not find a pattern for, sort of stopped looking. And at the time I had just purchased this huge hobby like sock yarn haul, and then I received the yarn and I was like, I actually don't love this yarn. It's all like superwash wool, 25% acrylic, and it's quite scratchy, which is the primary reason I don't like it. And I think I am almost always going to want to hand wash anything that I've hand knit. I just don't really foresee doing anything else. So it's not really useful to me to have superwash wool sock yarn, which I quickly realized. And this stuff is like very scratchy. I think if you buy nicer superwash yarn, obviously that is not scratchy. But I bought this online. I didn't realize how scratchy it would be. Yeah, I just don't love it. So I had 2 100-gram skeins of this brown yarn, and I decided that I wanted to make a lace button-up shirt like that pattern I had seen, because I couldn't find the pattern and because I knew nothing about construction. Like, for instance, this inspiration pattern was very much not constructed the way that I'm going to show you that I constructed this. I was like, yeah, I'll just do it myself. And then I was like, what's the easiest way for me to like not have to ever knit this lace pattern flat? And I was like, I'll do a raglan. I'll do a bottom-up raglan. And I'm sure this will have no problems for me in the future. And I'm sure it'll take like 2 100-gram skeins and there'll be no problems. So I did, and I cast it on last year. One mistake that I made right at the beginning and simply decided not to fix, was that I knit it, I twisted the loop. I twisted the loop. I know you have to stop when you do that. It's not like crochet. But I twisted the yarn and I thought to myself, huge brain, the way I want to do this is I want to make a bottom-up raglan and then steek it. So who cares if it's twisted? I certainly won't need to try it on while I embark on this extremely laborious long-term project. So I just lived with it. I was like, I think I did cast on like 240 or whatever stitches twice, and I was like, I'm simply not doing it again. I don't care that it's really gonna suck for me, and it has. So it'll be hard to see where I'm at. But I have gotten to the point where I attached my sleeves, and now I'm doing the raglan decreases. You can tell this is like the only use for a row counter that I've ever found. This tells me how many stitches on the pattern repeat I have before the raglan decrease, like how much it's supposed to end up with, because the lace pattern, because you're doing increases and decreases, like 14, like stitch number 14 is occasionally not going to be at the same place every time you decrease, if that makes sense. Like, because you're doing the decreases sometimes, that doesn't work out, so this helps me keep track. I wasn't doing it like that for a while, and some of when I took an account, some of them were very wrong. So now I'm doing these decreases. I'm hopefully going to get to the collar, or to the shoulder, and then I can finally cast off and you know, sew up my sides and steek it. Here's my little steek section where I'm going to put the button band. I am getting more and more excited for this project as I keep moving on. I have no idea if it's going to fit me. But I guess at this point I just got to soldier on. But yeah, one problem with this project is that, as I said before, I was completely sure this would fit into 200 grams of yarn, which is all that I had. Having only made socks, which I'll take, like, I feel like every sock I've ever made has taken like 60 grams of yarn. Many of the socks I've made have used more than one type of yarn, so I guess that kind of keeps my mind inaccurate about how many grams it takes to make a pair of socks. But that's certainly been my experience. So I'm like, yeah, 100 grams of sock yarn is like just an endless supply. So 200 grams, I don't know, I could probably make a dress with that. That was wrong. And I did get, I don't know, probably about here. And I was like, yeah, I am getting a little low on yarn. And then I used up my last skein of yarn. And as I've said, I don't want to buy more yarn, and I don't really want to buy more hobby yarn, which is kind of expensive to ship. And also I bought this in a 4-pack. I'm not buying another 4-pack of yarn. So what I did was, in order to sort of get around not wanting to buy more hobby yarn and not wanting to buy especially another 4-pack of yarn, which is the only way this is available, I simply bought the one skein of this yarn that I could find on eBay. I think it cost the same amount that it would have cost me to buy the 4-pack of yarn for just the one skein, but I can feel good about it. I did it the way I wanted. Yeah, so now I definitely have enough yarn to finish this project, and I won't have to do something very scary and negative, like finish the project in the other color that came in the 4-pack, which is like a light beige, which I also have still a lot of. Yeah, so I think that's all I want to say about this project. Hopefully someday it'll be in a state where it's a little easier to show. I think especially because it is twisted, you can't really tell what it is. I've confused many people. Yeah, what is my next work in progress? I'll tell you about this. So my next work in progress is the one I'm most excited by at the moment. It's definitely the one that I'm working on the most right now. But it is the Paul Klee sweater by Midori Hirose. I think that's how you say her pattern designer name. But hopefully, I fell in love with this sweater. It was like the first sweater pattern I ever really wanted to make. It's actually the first sweater I've ever made. But it is, its main feature, which I've recently completed, is this very beautiful colorwork yoke. you are meant to have all these sort of like tonally similar yarns in every row, and then you like slowly have this gradient from one color to the next color. I didn't really do that. I used basically all scrap yarn for this, some of it mine, some of it others, and just sort of ended up picking colors that I thought I wanted to pair together. I actually really like the way this has turned out, even though I don't really think it's the way that the pattern intends. And yeah, I've really enjoyed knitting this pattern. I was very afraid of doing stranded colorwork again after the last time when I was very bad at it. And also very afraid in a way that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this, but this certainly scared the crap out of me. But my impression of stranded colorwork, and this is certainly how I did it last time, is that if you knit colorwork in a very dense gauge on like very small needles, it becomes a lot harder to like screw up your floats so that they're too tight on the back, I think, because like you're already making stitches that are very dense. I don't know if that makes sense. That's certainly how I did it last time, I think. But last time I held both yarns in my left hand and I knit continental. I would just like have one of them go under my finger and one of them go over and sort of pick them as I needed, which made it very tight. I actually had to like unravel and go back and sort of adjust a few times when I did that last colorwork project. And this one, you are intentionally knitting a very loose gauge of colorwork so that you have this sort of like floaty, enjoyable colorwork project. So I was like a couple months into planning this because I was trying to get all these scrap yarns together. I was like, oh no, what if I'm really bad at knitting the colorwork? But actually I think it was a great exercise for me and it was not actually that bad. I did knit this with like the two-handed colorwork style, which I never knit English before. And that's how it works. You knit one color is held in your left hand continental and one color is on your right and you knit it English. And I never done that before. And I actually really enjoyed it. It certainly was like not faster than knitting like the two-handed colorwork that I'd done before, where I'd held both my yarns in my left hand, but it was also not very slow either, and I really enjoyed doing it. I thought I would find it like really annoying to switch back and forth. But yeah, this is her all blocked. That's why it looks so nice. I was very afraid that it would not look good after being blocked and I would have to unravel it again. But yeah, I also was originally going to knit the size like medium 2, I think it's called in the pattern, which I think would have fit me appropriately, but I swatched multiple times. I did the stockinette swatch flat and I did the colorwork swatch in the round with just like a small amount, and I think I probably did it with magic loop, which I obviously didn't do for this. I did most of this like traveling loop. And I didn't make gauge either time. And instead of just thinking, you know, Renee, this is a oversized pattern, you'll simply survive if it's not as oversized as the pattern suggests, because I wasn't very off gauge either. I was just like a little under. I was like, oh, so I should size up to L, which means that I needed, I think two more rows of colorwork. So 4 more colors. And because it's like that, like it's like I think the yoke is sort of staggered. So like probably like small to medium 2, like there's a certain number of rows for the colorwork yoke, and then like large to like 2XL or something. There's another number of rows for the yoke. And so I've jumped to the next size yoke, which means that this comes like kind of far down on my shoulders, where I've seen like other people, like it comes like here on my shoulders, and it is not the same at all. So that is very different. So I'm not sure if I'll like the size that this ends up being, which is 100% my fault. But I certainly am enjoying knitting it now. My main color is one of the big yarn purchases that I made last year. This is a linen cashmere blend from Color Mart. Yes, they're called Color Mart, which sells like industrial knitting cones for personal use, or like it's the end of their supply of industrial knitting cones that are no longer going to be used for making ready-to-wear clothes. I'm explaining this really badly. So it's sort of reuse. It's sort of good for, you know, the planet or whatever. I did not realize how long it would take me to process this yarn. So the way that you're meant to do it, and you can do this before or after knitting as far as I can tell, but for reasons that will become clear, I had to do this before knitting. Because it's meant for machine knitting, it comes with oil on it that you want to wash off, you know, at some point before you actually wear the item. And so I, in my infinite wisdom, when I bought the yarn, I was like, oh, well, I'll just do it afterwards. Not thinking about how a lot of the yarn that I'm using in this project is not for machine knitting. In fact, all of it is not for machine knitting. And so it doesn't have this coating on it. And the way that you need to wash it is like in hot water. You do like all the things that you're not supposed to do to yarn to get this oil off, and then you let it dry. Some people even like put it like into their washer dryer, which I rent, and so my washer dryer isn't great, so I wasn't going to do that. But some people do, even with like 100% cashmere, which I think is very neat. So yeah, I like went through like a whole process with this yarn where like I'm holding 4 strands of this together in order to get to a fingering weight. So like originally, like I got the cones and I wound them into balls. I think held 2 together, and then I was like, okay, I'll go back and I'll wind them into balls held 4 together, just to like be simple. And then I realized that I actually need to unwind them and wind them into hanks so that I could wash the yarn before I started knitting. So I did that, and then eventually they were dry, and then I wound them back into balls. All of that took quite a long time, and really could have been saved if I had just originally thought that I needed to wash the yarn before. But I didn't, and now it's done. It was also very silly because you're sort of stripping the yarn so much, you're not only getting the machine oil off, you're potentially also like getting the regular oil off that you're supposed to have in any animal fiber, or like any animal fiber that's not silk, you know, like a hair fiber. And so like a hair fiber, one of the things I suggest is they're like, well, if it's not too bad, you can just use eucalyptus, which like has lanolin in it, to sort of add those natural oils back into the fiber and make it sort of strong. But another thing you can do, you know, like making your own hair strong, is to put conditioner into your sort of final rinse, which I did do. I definitely took some of the yarn out and let it dry, and I was like, this is crunchy. So I washed the rest of it, and in the final wash I used some eucalyptus, some conditioner, which is very silly to me. But now it's all clean and all dry and all ready. And yeah, it's this like beautiful chocolate brown. I realized that I bought this chocolate brown yarn, and I bought a lot of chocolate brown. You're gonna see some more chocolate brown later, in fact. And I realized that the reason I like this color is because I have a jacket in this color, which I also made a long time ago when I was really big into sewing. And I realized wear all of those items together because they're all different colors of chocolate brown. So like my main outerwear garment is gonna be like a clashing color with this sweater and like this other shirt that I'm making. So I do need to contemplate what I'm going to do there, and my choices around that. But yeah, what else do I have to say about this? I think that's it. But very excited about this project so far. I'm finally done with the yoke, and I'm gonna, you know, just have plain stockinette to do for the rest of it, which I think will be very exciting to me. But yeah, that's my main work in progress, I would say. And then I have two others, which I would say are basically hibernating, but I think are exciting also. So I'd like to show them off. But my first one I've been working on forever, and I'll finally one day be done with it. But it's a crochet vest of my own creation, sort of, which is based on a pattern called the A-B-Sea Blanket, which is a collection of granny squares like this, which each have their own like alphabetical sea creature on them. So this is like the square for D, so it's the deep sea angler, and this is the square for W, it's a walrus. And my plan is to add in the rest of these sea creatures onto this vest, and I don't know, weave my ends in maybe. I've worn this out without doing that. Yeah, is to sort of add on the rest of the sea creatures for this. There's no real reason why I haven't made progress on this. It sits next to my bed and I just have to like pick out the colors and make all the sea creatures, which are nice little projects. I really enjoyed doing this. But just haven't made progress. Yeah, I do think it's gonna be so cool. Last year I went to, this is my gay life hack, by the way, but the aquarium near me had like a pride night in the evening for queer people to show up and enjoy the aquarium on their own. And my wife and I arrived early because we both have jobs where we could have gotten there at 5 instead of 6, I think, or maybe 6 instead of 7. And it was almost completely empty. It was like being on an aquarium date in a movie. And just think of how much better that evening would have been if I had also been wearing my aquarium vest. Completed. So that's my goal for, you know, this June. It'll be way too warm to wear this wool blend, mostly acrylic, crocheted vest, which is quite thick. But yeah, this is mostly granny squares. I don't know how the granny square girlies are doing it, because if I had just made granny squares, this would have looked quite bad. So I've done sort of some, if you were knitting and if you knew what you're doing, I would call this shaping, but I just sort of made some rows around the collar. I was originally going to add like a full like ribbed collar as well. I actually sort of like it like this. And I did sort of the same on the edges as well. You can tell that there are these sort of corners in the white yarn around the sides. And then I did like a knit ribbing on the bottom, which I do like. But this creates sort of a crop top length. So I was trying to sort of have more pieces in my closet that I could wear this with, since I tend to sort of create things that are this sort of crop length. You can tell, like this top too, I sewed a while ago and it's quite cropped. So there's kind of nothing, there's no reason I should be wearing it right now in February, yet I am. Yeah, so I did all that pretty much all last year, or maybe even the year before, frankly. And now I just have to knit these little, crochet these little aquarium creatures on. There's some fun ones coming up. I think I've got like an electric eel and like a loggerhead turtle, and there's an anemone one. I'm not sure if I'm gonna put that one on. I tried knitting one and I was like, I don't actually know if I want this on my body. But yeah, other stuff like that, which I'm quite excited by. Just have to get them done. Just have to get them done. So hopefully I'll feel sort of more energy towards getting those done and not just knitting on my Paul Klee sweater forever until it's finished. Yeah, and then there's my last work in progress, which I think is so exciting. But it is also a vest. It's a little bit longer this time, but it's a knit vest made in this mosaic knitting pattern This is actually based on the Light Cowl mosaic pattern, which is a free pattern on Ravelry. But the story behind this is that I had this leftover Malabrigo Rios yarn from a past vest project, and my friend locally who spins yarn gifted me some of her handspun. Yeah, it is very funky to me. I think she might tell you that a lot of it's very uneven, and I will say, to Bridget's credit, much more even spinning is done now. But I actually really love the way it's sort of funky and textured, and the way it's very like two-colored in all these different ways. So I initially wasn't really sure how much I had or like how far it would go. So I was going to just make a cowl based on the blacklight pattern, but I made the cowl and I was like, I have all of this yarn left. And also occasionally I am quite allergic to wool, which I think is a fun thing to drop in the middle of this podcast. So I was sort of like, this 100% Tarky handspun wool is maybe not the greatest thing to have close to my face at all times. It tends to just give me a headache. It doesn't really make, it doesn't really like bother my skin necessarily. So I have many wool garments, and I know that if I make wool garments then I'll be fine with them, but I do think the cowl was taking things a little too far. So I frogged that cowl, and now I'm working on a vest instead. You can tell that I've gotten to a very specific point in the vest, which is where I'm supposed to split off for the front and back and knit up the armholes. I'm very afraid of doing this since I don't have a pattern and I don't want to screw up the armholes. I feel like it will really determine what the entire finished project looks like. I did get like a build your own pattern book from the library, and I wrote down all of the instructions for how to do that here. So at one point or another, I will continue working on this, and I will be brave enough to do the fronts and backs of this vest. But that day is not today, and I've sort of been ignoring it in favor of working on this clay sweater project. But I am quite excited to finish this, and I do think this yarn is so beautiful. I just love seeing like the small little color changes from row to row, and I think it's really exciting. I'm kind of mad at my friend Bridget because I didn't like spin cycle yarns before this, and now I really do. And that like two-color yarn effect, I'm like, oh man, it's really gonna cause problems for me down the line. But yeah, and I think like mosaic knitting is also such like a fun way to do color work, and it's such a fun application of this kind of yarn. So yeah, I'm very excited for this sort of muted argyle effect that I'm going for. But yeah, one day this will be finished, but not today. So yeah, we're up to, what is it, 3 works in progress? Do I have any else? I think that's it. So as I've said before, coming to the final part of every typical yarn podcast, typically there's a new acquisitions section of these, and as I've said, I don't want to buy anything else. I don't want to make acquisitions this year. I did buy this hobby yarn. I guess that's my one true new acquisition, but the other thing I've done is that I really enjoy natural dyeing. I also sort of want to do real, or not real, but like non-natural dyeing, synthetic dyeing with yarn soon, and we'll see how far I get in that. But I really like natural dyeing. I have a community garden plot where last year I grew indigo. It was very fun, very, I would say, easy also to like do some like natural dyeing with that, with just fresh indigo leaves. So I did some of that last year, and then I in the fall that's the season it was, I collected a bunch of black walnuts on like my walk to and from the gym, that I've had stored in my freezer for like the past months, And this week I finally decided to do something with them. And I will show you the results of that now. So I mostly dyed yarn, or actually entirely dyed yarn, and I mostly dyed wool yarn. So I'll start there. So I would say like my deepest color that I got to, I could have gone this deep, I think, with probably all the yarn that I had. I only had like 14 black walnuts, but I think one of the things on the internet said that you could use like 20, like 1 walnut per 20 grams of fiber. So this is just like a little 10 gram sock yarn mini skein. But I think I boiled this accidentally for like 3 hours. And this is how dark it got. You can tell there's some sort of striations as well. This is where the knot was, I'll be honest. But I actually really like that. And this is obviously a color that I love and enjoy. So I don't have strict plans for what I'm gonna do for this yet. But I'm really glad that I have it. This was my first skein that I did. And then my next experiment was I took some of the like dye out of the dye pot after I had finished boiling the walnuts. You just like boil the walnuts with the yarn. Another case of simply boiling, putting yarn into extremely hot water, which I didn't think you could do. But I took some of I sort of dip dyed with this. So this is a skein that I had previously done some indigo dyeing with, and I think had pre-treated with mordant as well. But I like dip dyed this, so now it's sort of this mixed color, and I actually really like the way that this turned out. It's obviously not as green as it was before, or like as turquoise as it was before. I think this is one of the skeins that I didn't submerge in the indigo for that long. But I think it's very cool. Yeah, I'm sort of not sure how I feel about this sort of like hand painted effect. I feel like a lot of the hand dyed yarns that I use, I really like for like the speckles, which are seemingly hard to achieve with natural dyeing. But I'm learning to enjoy it. There's like a couple projects I've seen on Ravelry, which I really love. So I'm trying to get into it and trying to sort of figure out what I want to use those kind of dyes for, since they seem a little bit more achievable to me as like a home dyer. Yeah, so these next two, I did like a full 100 gram skein of sock yarn in this like nice sort of butterscotchy color. I have no idea what I'll use this for, but I think the color is so pretty. Obviously my skein is very messy, but I've done this before many times, and I promise you it will turn into a cake with hopefully not too much fuss. You just stretch it out on the umbrella enough and it works out, I promise. But yeah, and then my last new acquisition is this mercerized cotton yarn, which I think I mordanted like months ago and then left to dry. But it turned into this, so much dye leaked out of this. I thought it was going to be like a deep chocolate brown. But now it's this sort of, I don't know what color brown this is, but I just sort of like the way it turned out. I think there's about 50 grams of this, so I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with it. There's not that much to do with it, but I've sort of got some ideas. I have this like wild idea that I'll make a crochet project bag that looks like a basket of strawberries. I don't know if anyone else saw this. I do think that everyone saw this, but I definitely got like many Instagram reels that were showing me how to make like a strawberry pattern in crochet, where like the strawberries are little baubles, and then on top there's like a row of green to make the little leaves that go on top of the strawberries. And I'm like, what if I made a little project bag where like this is like the bottom and it's like a little basket weave pattern, and then there's like a couple rows of strawberries in the strawberry yarn, or like the red and green yarn, which I have already because I've been thinking about this project. And then there's like little white strawberry blooms at the end, and then like I grow strawberries, so I know what they look like, but like you get these little strawberry runners where they sort of expand, and like that could be the ties. I think this is an idea that has legs, and I do deeply and desperately need a project bag because I'm currently working out of like one of those. Well, I currently work out of like whatever tote bag I'm using that day, but when I had a dedicated project bag, I was working out of like one of those like reusable plastic bags that has dividers for different like beer cans. It's designed to carry a 6-pack. And I think I could do better. I think I could do better than that maybe. So that's maybe my project bag plans for the future. Yeah. So that was my first yarn podcast. I hope to see if this is something that I enjoy and will return to. I certainly like using the internet as sort of a store of my thoughts that I get for free. Like this is the primary way that I post on like Ravelry and like Storygraph and all these other places that are sort of supposed to track your activity. So maybe YouTube will be like that as well, where I can sort of just record my thoughts about knitting and like see where I was at and what I was interested in at times in my life. But yeah, I hope you've had a pleasant little time listening to me ramble on about knitting / crocheting, and have a great rest of your day. Okay, that was it. I did have an intrusive thought that this was going to stop recording halfway through and I just simply wouldn't know. So we'll see.